Well, good morning. My name is Suzanne Barber. I'm the director for the Center for Identity at the University of Texas. You know, it seems like we can't go a day these days without reading headlines about some major data breach. In the last 12 months, our information has been compromised by giant retailers, by prestigious banks, by healthcare providers, and restaurants. Every minute, 19 people fall victim to identity theft. It takes the average victim an estimated $500 out of their pocket and about 30 hours away from work to resolve each incident of identity theft. This costs the United States billions of dollars every year, and identity theft is a growing crime in the U.S. Odds of you being a victim in a given year are about 1 in 20. Odds of you being a victim at some point in your life are 1 in 4, and that number is getting worse. In 2012, the total monetary loss due to identity theft was about $24.7 billion. This cost is more than any other kind of theft in our country. If you include car, auto, any kind of theft, you combine them all, identity theft is larger. So the Center for Identity was established in 2010 as a center of excellence for identity management, privacy, and security. The research and education endeavors of the center are really breaking new ground to help you anticipate and mitigate future identity theft and fraud. We do this by delivering the highest quality discoveries, applications, education, and outreach. Today I'm here because I wanted to talk to you about a research project at the center called the Mapping of the Identity Ecosystem. The project maps identity for people, organizations, and devices. It describes, what attributes can describe us or organizations or devices, or how are those attributes linked to one another, or how can the criminal get access to one attribute and then through a bunch of links through the attributes get access to others. The ecosystem uses data from the center's Identity Theft Assessment and Prediction Project. We call it ITAP. The ecosystem uses ITAP data about behaviors of identity thieves and fraudsters to answer questions like, what are the attributes or what are the identity information that the criminals like best? What do they like to grab first? If they steal a less valuable attribute, how do they go about then gathering more information about you and getting access to higher value attributes? Sometimes through this talk, I'll talk about identity attributes, and sometimes I'll call it personal identifiable information, or PII. So let's put on your glasses. So first we want to explore what is an attribute. An attribute is a piece of information that can identify a person, organization, or device. For people, these attributes are things like your phone number, your email address, your username, your password, your driver's license, your fingerprint, your social security number. Lots of stuff describes you. But let's talk about some of the more common assets, like your name. Your name is on your birth certificate or a common nickname. It's probably the most common identifying information, and you provide it countless times every day. So really, why should you be concerned about safeguarding such a common piece of information? Well, your full name or even your nickname can be used by a criminal to falsify and identify themselves as you to gain access to your private information. Or let's look at your home address. That's where you live, but it appears in the white pages or whitepages.com, and it's an essential part of your PII. It appears on your driver's license, on your credit card billing information, on your student ID, on tax forms, on work documents, all over the place. And what about your emails? You're very often asked for a unique online email account for many daily transactions with stores, with friends, with government agencies, and we hand it over for pizza discounts and newsletters. But email addresses are commonly used as your username to log in somewhere. Or phishing scams are a real concern when it comes to email accounts, where false, very authentic looking emails can capture your personal information or infect your computer with malware. So paired with this information, your email, maybe your name, your home address, thieves can really get access to a lot of private information. And I have a question for you. How many of you use the same email for your friends, your bank, your healthcare provider, your work? The criminals love when you make it so easy for them. All of these common pieces of PII are requested almost daily. We hand them over easily, but paired with information, thieves can really get access to your valuable information that can put your finances, your health care, your social status, your reputation, and even your physical well-being in danger. So let's look at some more PII. We'll do on and off. So our most important piece of information is what? Our social security number, right? It's that 9-digit number that is issued one time. Now it's issued when we're born in the United States. And it's really issued one time only to U.S. citizens, to permanent and temporary residents in the country. This is the primary way that our government recognizes, but also financial institutions or employers or healthcare providers. Practically everyone. Little League asks for your social security number. But if compromised, criminals can really use that information to access some very sensitive information. And unlike credit cards, it's almost impossible to get a new one. In one of the biggest breaches, we've learned that credit cards have been compromised a lot. And these credit cards tie back to your bank accounts, and thieves can use that information to either charge up lots of debt to those credit cards. Charging that card is one thing. Using that card and some other information about you to create some new accounts that you don't even know about is a whole nother problem. And lastly, I'd like to look at biometrics. Biometrics are identifying human characteristics, including our fingerprints, our facial recognition, DNA, our hand geometry, our iris, how we smell, how we type, how we walk, and how we talk. Okay. Biometrics can be used to access your smartphone, get into very secure areas, or get into Disneyland. This information is very unique. After all, who walks like you? It's much slower to be able to change, and it's harder to steal or mimic. So this information is very useful in authenticating a person or proving that you are who you say you are. This information is also highly personal. After all, it's not like you're carrying a credit card, it's you. So your biometrics are a digital impression of you. So when compromised, this information can really have very large and systemic cost. In the identity ecosystem that we model people, organizations, and devices. People are orange. It helps you remember we bleed orange at the University of Texas. Organizations are currently limited to businesses, but will be expanded to organizations like governments and nonprofits and so forth. And those are shown in green. Think money, businesses, green. And devices are limited right now to computational devices like computers, and computers are colored blue in the ecosystem. People, organizations, and devices all have identifying information, and one of the things to know that the thieves use a lot is that this information is connected. Okay? So let's put on your glasses once more and look at some examples about how this information is connected through the three ecosystems. All right, so my email account, let's say Suzanne@gmail.com, is issued by an email account provider, Google, and Google uses an email server, and that server is identified on the internet with a set of identifying information, but one of the most important is probably its IP address. That's going to serve up email content, and if you're like me, way too much email content, to my smartphone. I log into my email account, and the identifiers that I'm going to use that are going to authenticate me or prove that I am who I say I am are my username and my password. And then once received, that email account provider is going to authenticate me, and hey, notices that there's a pattern here that's recognizable, And that is that I'm at a Wi-Fi network connection at Starbucks on 15th Street at 8 a.m. every morning. All right. So our organizations and our devices really do ID us. So let's spend some time thinking about the people ecosystem, or really us personally. And if we investigate those attributes or nodes in the graph in the ecosystem that identify us, we'll use color to talk about some characteristics, and we'll often use size to talk about value, and then we'll look at the connections that really reflect the center's understanding of the ecosystem map and really help us leverage to figure out what to protect and what's most important. As I mentioned, different identity attributes have different values. The value of the attribute is given by size, and it helps us to figure out which attributes are the most important to protect. Or we may discover that there may be low value attributes that are linked in the ecosystem to high value attributes, whereby the threat can gain access to one of our low value attributes that we're not worrying about, that we're not paying attention to, and then through the connections in the ecosystem gain access to some high value attributes, let's say like our social security number that we mentioned before. So even though those low value attributes, some of them connected to high value attributes, can really cause problems. We use color in the ecosystem to talk about categories of attributes, like attributes that describe what we have, or what we know, or what we are. The attributes that we have are in purple, what we know are in blue, and what we are in green here. In this next view, green shows the attributes with really low risk of exposure. It means that they're really not going to get out there much. But the ones that are in red have a very high risk of exposure or high probability of either being stolen or exposed to others. Some attributes are very unique to you as an individual, some for a small group, neighborhood, culture, or some just unique to a very large group. An attribute's pervasiveness in the ecosystem indicates how frequently this identity attribute gets used to identify you in all your transactions. So let's look closer at these attributes that identify us. And remember, we'll look back at actually 4 categories: what you know, what you are, what you do, and what you have. What you know is like bibliographic information. Examples of this are like your hometown, your mother's maiden name. This is personal information that is so easy to find about you on the internet, social network sites or Ancestry.com. It's really more discoverable than you think by your long-lost high school sweetheart or by Joe the fraudster. Right? The second category is what you are. This information is typically biometrics, right? Your eye color, your fingerprints, your gait, even your pattern of your heartbeat, and more physical characteristics that can identify you. This information is becoming increasingly digital. Think about even your DNA. And vulnerabilities are increasing as this information becomes more digital and more accessible by the criminal. In the third category, we can describe attributes as what you have. This is often credentials that are given to you, like your student ID, your driver's license, social security number, or healthcare insurance card. And lastly, and this is a category that we've added this year, and that is what you do. It reflects your patterns of behavior, your shopping patterns, your communication patterns, where you go, your location patterns. So we can use color and size in the ecosystem to analyze the complexity of all of this PII that's describing you. So if we color the attributes by risk of exposure and size by value, we'll be able to analyze that value again and look at the uniqueness of a attribute by showing that what's unique to an individual is in rose color, what is unique to a small group in purple, and in a larger group in green. Knowing the prevalence of an attribute will help us understand how widely it's used to identify us and the likelihood that we could use this to enroll people to identify them in a system. But your PII just doesn't exist in isolation. All those nodes are not existing in isolation. Many of the pieces are connected to one another and really are dependent on one another. So these lines help demonstrate the connections between your attributes and the different types of connections. You can see here that the driver's license is connected to a lot. In fact, in some places you can consider it our default national ID. Let's quickly go over all those connections. In a driver's license, your composition connections are, think about all the other information on your driver's license. And those are shown in yellow, your address, your name, and so forth. Breeder relations are shown in green. You can use information like your driver's license and your birth certificate to get a passport, so it creates other pieces of PII. And then the determines connection. How could I get access as a fraudster to one piece of information and using that determine another piece of information about you? So in this example, we're looking at the driver's license, and you can see from the green connection that the driver's license breeds a number of different identity attributes. And once other documents depend on these attributes, some other documents can be, or PII can be created. So what does this really mean? What do all these connections mean? Well, it really means that there's a lot of pathways by which the criminal can get access to one piece of information and then go about creating or gaining access to other information about you. So let's talk about some cases or some examples to make this more real world. I'd like to share a few of these cases that show how we're going to map those cases back to the ecosystem and how we could have used this ecosystem to help predict or prevent some of that fraud. The first case involves a 37-year-old woman from Queens, New York named Rosa Vargas. Rosa thought that she was blissfully ready to marry the love of her life and was applying for a marriage license when she learned she was already married to 2 other men. What a nightmare. Just joking. This identity theft really began 16 years prior to her filing for that identity license. That marriage certificate. She had lost her birth certificate in her 20s, and she didn't think much about really losing this very vital piece of PII. But in 2004, she found that her application for a marriage license was denied by the city of New York. Her application was rejected because they noticed she'd been married twice in 1996, one to a man from Mexico and one marriage to a man from Ecuador. After learning these facts, she decided to get a license in another jurisdiction that didn't know about this, in Long Island to be exact. So 3 weeks later, she exchanged ID with her fiance and thought all this was behind her. But in 2009, one of her husbands served her with divorce papers. So she refused to sign them and then had to hire a lawyer. This is identity theft, and these are consequences that Rose is having to pay for. This man, and when she didn't want to sign the papers, he shows up at her mother-in-law's house. Rose's mother-in-law showed him a picture of her and said, "Really, is this the woman you're married to?" Of course, he said no. But Rosa had to ask the courts to rule that she was a victim of fraud and nullify the 2 marriages. The fraud it could have been easy to detect because the fraudulent marriage license said that her mother was born in Venezuela when actually her mother was a native of Puerto Rico. So you think the story ends here, but I'm sorry to say it doesn't. And like many identity theft victims, the victimization continues. Another fake marriage was discovered in Long Island, and she had to handle that as well. So let's think about what are the PII assets that are described in this story and the relationship in the ecosystem. Our birth certificate is a vital record. Our first piece of PII, it's essential what we call breeder document. And the victim in this story lost her birth certificate in her 20s. And from the ecosystem, we could have found that birth certificate can breathe all kinds of other assets. In this case, someone used those to reap marriage benefits. There's another piece of PII that's very interesting, and that is that one of the married men showed up physically at Rosa's mother-in-law's house. While we thought address is really a low-risk attribute, it really became a high-risk attribute in Rose's case, and it's worth mentioning now. Falling into the wrong hands, the consequences may mean financial issues, but it also may mean time and reputation, certainly emotional distress, and personal character choices. So let's look at case 2. This is a case, identity theft, that was just reported in November. 5 suspects in Colorado were stealing mail from neighborhood apartments and using these documents to create fake IDs, cash checks, and make a lot of purchases. In one incident, they just didn't reach into the mailbox, they just stole the whole mailbox. The district attorney handling the case said that the goal of the operation of the thieves was to get cash, merchandise, personal property, and services to fund their lifestyle and their drug habits. The accused used computers to forge documents where they put their picture, but then the victim's address and other PII. They were able to then combine their information with their victim's information. And one of the suspects used a fake driver's license to then impersonate the victim and cash a $2,850 check. One of the things I ask of you is find out from your bank how much they will cover if you're a victim of identity theft. You often think it's the total amount of the theft, but sometimes it is not. 2 other suspects in the ring used stolen credit cards at a home improvement store on several occasions, and then went and purchased stolen gift cards that they used at Bed Bath & Beyond, Walmart. They just had quite the spending spree. This case includes multiple incidents of mail theft, falsified ID, and successful cash checking, and stolen credit cards. When the investigators found them, they found bags of false documents and stolen credit cards that had the thieves' pictures and the victim's name and addresses. So we often associate identity theft with cyber attacks, but many incidents still are this literal paper trail. Mail theft is rampant and will lead to severe hardships for you if you're the victim. So in the ecosystem, let's look at, for just a utility bill, what does that reveal about our identity? Bills are tied to our names, our bank accounts, our home addresses, our telephone numbers, and if compromised, I can pair all that information as a criminal with real information and fictitious information to really wreak havoc on your accounts and your life. So case number 3. As you may know, the horrors of identity theft may not end with your passing. Ghosting is a term used to describe the abuse of a deceased individual's identity. Approximately 2.5 million identities are stolen each year from deceased victims. In the 1990s, Dochin Khrushchev came to the U.S. to live with a host family in D.C. and to attend school. One day, he vanished. His American family couldn't find him. His family in Bulgaria couldn't find him. 6 years later, Khrushchev resurfaced as Jason Robert Evers, the name of a 3-year-old boy who was kidnapped and killed in Ohio in 1982. Using the boy's name and birth date, that's all he had, he bred a birth certificate, a social security number, or Oregon driver's license, a voter registration card, and a passport. This is all he obtained, got information from public and government accounts. He used this identity to get a job with the Oregon Liquor Control Commission, and his colleagues said he did a great job. He had friends, he had a fiance, he was a member of the tennis club and the chess club. Great guy. His fraud was finally uncovered when the State Department did a cross-check between passport applications and deceased victims, or deceased citizens. This ongoing probe, called Operation Death Watch, spit out the name Jason Robert Evers, which ultimately led to Khrushchev. When they finally arrested him, he wouldn't tell the authorities his name, and so they had to keep referring to him as John Doe, and finally they were able to figure out who he was. And he said his motive was he just didn't want to go back to Bulgaria. He pled guilty and he's sentenced to 2 years and 1 day in prison for passport fraud and aggravated identity theft. In 2012, he was deported to Bulgaria. But it's important to remember that all he started out with to create this whole new life was a name and a birth date. Both of these are probably on your Facebook page now. So let's look at some of the attributes that are connected in the ecosystem for this incident, this case. So Krista obtained first a name, and then a date of birth of the deceased Ohio boy that he got from the newspaper. Then he created a birth certificate, a social security number, and then he further created a fake persona with his passport, the driver's license, the registration, the passport, and the voter registration. That's the information that they found that he had created. We suspect that there were much more. So in our world of social media and colorful apps, we're sharing lots of information about ourselves. Think for a moment about the information you reveal about yourself on social media. You may list your current hometown, your cell phone number, your email address, your birthday, when you check in and what restaurants, when you leave them. As you have seen, these small pieces of information can lead to big consequences. Hackers and malicious cyber thieves aren't always after credit card information and bank accounts. Sometimes they're aiming to attack you or damage reputation, to harass or stalk you or people you know. In one famous example, a fake account was set up in the name of St. Louis Cardinals manager Tony La Russa. In 2009, the account tweeted, "Lost 2 out of 3, but made it out of Chicago without one drunk driving incident or a dead pitcher." The tweet really made light of La Russa's previous drunk driving arrest and 2 Cardinals pitchers that had died that year. La Russa sued Twitter, and claiming the imposter Twitter page damaged his reputation and created emotional distress. He filed the suit and made several claims. One of the claims that he made was about cyber squatting. A month after the suit was filed, Twitter finally removed the fake account and announced their verified account program to help avoid celebrity and fan confusion. After this, La Russa withdrew his suit. Another thing that happens in social media is catfishing. It's a term used for luring someone into a relationship using a fictitious identity. Movies and TV shows really love to exploit these tales of woe, but in 2013, and I'm sure you heard about it, the Notre Dame linebacker Manti Te'o fell victim to one of these conniving schemes, and his personal life was just laid out there for everyone to dissect. Other lesser-known cases are just as concerning. In Milwaukee, an 18-year-old student posing as a girl on Facebook tricked 31 female classmates into sending him inappropriate pictures of themselves, and then he blackmailed the classmates with those photos. In New Jersey, there was a case of social media identity theft in 2011, when after 3 months of dating, Dana Thornton and her boyfriend, who was a police officer, broke up. Instead of moving on amicably, girlfriend created a fraudulent Facebook account in her ex's name and began posting in his voice. The post claimed that he was on drugs as a narcotic officer, that he had spent all his money on women, and, quote, he was a piece of scum with a gun. Anger management. Thornton faced up to 18 months in prison for the crime, but her attorney said that the state's identity laws did not include electronic communication, which is really an issue that we're also looking at the center, and that is advocating for laws to catch up with the crime. In the end, Thornton was placed on supervised probation for a year, 50 hours of community service, and had to submit to a psychological evaluation. That last part is probably a good idea. Brands are also susceptible to online harassment and identity fraud. And you can see from the Sony breach that they're still dealing with and will deal with for years to come. One of the hackers' motives wasn't money, it was to embarrass Sony. After the breach and humiliating emails and business practices and pay disparities were thrown out on the internet, the giant was really exposed to potential lawsuits and a lot of backlash from Hollywood. So while it's easy to get a new credit card, it's not so easy to repair your reputation. Oftentimes these breaches are the result of just the wrong person getting their hands on two key pieces of information, your email and your password. Now we're going to look at identity theft through the eyes of a thief. And not just any thief. We're going to pick probably the most infamous cyber criminals in recent years, and that's Albert Gonzalez, who is currently in prison for 20 years in Michigan. He was heading a cyber circle that stole more than 90 million credit cards and debit cards from popular retailers like TJX, which is the parent of TJ Maxx, Marshalls, Home Goods, Office Max, Dave & Buster's, and Barnes & Noble. He operated between 2003 and 2008. And he celebrated his 30th birthday behind bars, but his escapades began very, very early in life. This malicious cyber mastermind bought his first PC at the age of 12, and at 14 he hacked into NASA, which sent a bunch of FBI agents running to his South Miami high school in Florida. Gonzalez was self-taught in hacking, and really his first interest was just a hack for free broadband. He also learned that he could get access to logins and passwords of top executives, and there really began his career. He rose into the ranks of a cybercrime message board called Shadow Crew, where criminals bought and sell credit card information really in an auction-like style. The thieves read tutorials to each other about cryptography to uncover the numbers in a magnetic stripe, for example. And like traditional message boards, there are moderators that help monitor the interactions of really thousands of members and make sure that if members buy some stolen credit cards, if they don't work, they get their money back. So I guess good work among thieves. And it just isn't credit cards that they bought and sold. They counterfeited passports, driver's license, social security numbers, birth certificates, college IDs, and health insurance. And so let's look at the value that they were able to reap from those identity assets. At one juncture, Gonzalez becomes the administrator of this site and carefully learns how to manipulate stolen data. Using the stolen data, he retrieved hundreds of thousands of dollars from fraudulent ATM withdrawals. In 2003, he was finally arrested in New York, but instead of throwing him behind bars, the government decided that he would work undercover. So undercover, he lured his black hat associates into a supposedly secure VPN, and that was wiretapped by the Secret Service. And that operation, called Operation Firewall, resulted in the arrest of 28 of the Shadow Crew members. So Gonzalez moves back to Miami. He's getting $75,000 a year from the Secret Service, continue his white hat hacking. But $75,000 a year was just not enough for Albert, right? So it wasn't long before he was back to his malicious roots. So he was wearing a white hat and a black hat at the same time. In 2005, he and his black hat conspirators began experimenting with what's called war driving expeditions. These outings involve hackers where they sit in parking lots, probably very big stores, with their laptops and a radio antenna. And after they breach a poorly secured Wi-Fi network, the hackers accessed the company's servers in minutes. And they didn't have to drive far. They hacked into BJ's wholesale club, DSW. They sold 400,000 cards from the wholesale club and about a million from the popular shoe store. When Gonzalez tried his hand at it, he breached the corporate servers of TJX, and he was able to get millions of credit card transactions. The way he did it, he created a VPN to frequent the servers without detection, and then he installed some software, and the credit card data was then streamed, collected, encrypted, compressed, and forwarded to Gonzalez's computer. This actually took quite a bit of time, but as I'll mention at the end of the talk, these criminals are well-resourced and they're very patient. At the end of 2006, he had collected more than 40 million credit cards. This can be easily done, especially when there's a lack of security on corporate servers. He routed his information. He didn't keep it in the United States. He routed it to the Ukraine and to Latvia, where he sold it on the dark web, and his accomplices in Eastern Europe decrypted the PIN codes from the cards so that Gonzalez could drain ATMs of cash. He was also famously part of the Heartland payment system, which is a huge breach, 7-Eleven and the Hannafords, in an operation that Gonzalez called Operation Get Rich or Die Trying. From Heartland, he got 130 million credit cards, and from Hannaford, he got 4.6 million. Finally, Secret Service were tipped off because Gonzalez was using one of his old handles as he was conducting business on the dark web. One of his old handles was called Suit Nazi. When he was arrested, he had 2 laptops and he had $22,000 of cash on him. And he admitted that he had 1.2 million buried in his parents' backyard. At that time, he had 16 million stolen cards in the Latvia server and 27 million in the Ukraine. His 20-year sentence was one of the harshest and longest prison terms for hacking that was imposed in the U.S. That's what he got. What did it cost Heartland and some of these others? For Heartland and some of the other companies, it cost them a total of $400 million in reimbursements, forensics, legal fees, and they affected 500 banks. Those banks, when those are attacked, they affect you. Accounting for time served and for good behavior, watch out, Gonzalez is expected to be out of prison in 2025. So what can we learn from all these stories? One, we can learn the threat is very sophisticated. Please don't make a mistake in thinking that there's only one Albert Gonzalez out there. There's lots of them, and they're growing. This is becoming a very attractive crime among criminal population. We also know that the identity ecosystem and your identity assets have value, and they are connected. Our personal identifiable information, or PII, is in our wallets, it's on our company servers, it's in our social media account, it's in our utility bills and our mailbox. As we develop a better understanding of these connections, we'll have better ways to manage our PII on a daily basis and figure out ways to protect our finances, our reputation, and our lives. At the center, we are investigating scams and cyber thieves, but we're also dedicating a tremendous amount of time and expertise to researching the best way to give you protection for your identity. So in October of last year, we debuted IDWise. It's a project funded in partnership with the Texas legislature. IDWise is a resource center for the public for identity theft, security, and privacy. We give clear and accessible resources to really empower you as citizens, both offline and online, to better understand your PII and to make better choices about protecting it on a daily basis. We've also developed a game called Beat the Thief that you and your kids can play down at the Palmer Event Center at South by Gaming Convention, and you can download it and play it on our website as well. Beat the Thief uses data from the ecosystem to set values and risk in the game to the PII and help kids to understand how to share information responsibly and beat the thief. In addition to the general public, IDWise provides some really dedicated resources to some of the most vulnerable in our society. And those are kids, parents of kids, older adults, retired and active military, and small businesses. So if you're one of those groups, I'd encourage you to check out the resources there at IDWise on the website. All of this information is free and accessible. But what are some of the following practices that might help all of us in protecting our identity? Create cryptic passwords and tough security questions. Criminals can use publicly available information to get access to your mother's maiden name or the street you grew up on. So make sure your answers are difficult to understand and are only questions you can answer. Monitor your surroundings. We have a lot of identity information that we share and we don't even realize it. Be cautious about the people around you and when you're sharing information. Keep an eye out on who's around you when you're entering your PIN number. Guard your Social Security number. Don't carry it with you. If anyone asks for your social, vet them. Make sure they really need it. Ask them if they can take any other information instead of that Social Security number. Use a cross-shredder. Identity thieves love to do dumpster dives into getting at your most valuable information. Don't leave easy access to receipts, your credit card statements, your credit card applications, your health care and other information that's easy to throw away and easy to find. Be wary of checks. As you heard, checkbooks are easy to steal and easy to use. So if you pay with checks frequently, maybe think about another form of payment. Never list your driver's license or your Social Security number on your check, and even consider maybe just using your first initial for your first name instead of your full name on the check. Check your credit report often. You're allowed 3 free credit reports each year, one from each one of the credit bureaus. Check those carefully, look for inaccuracies, and report errors immediately. Look at the transactions on your credit cards and your bank statements regularly. If they don't match your records, let your credit card or your bank company know. If you haven't received some of these statements and were expecting them, call immediately. Someone may have rerouted those for you. If you start to get mail about credit cards or anything that in your kid's name, think about somebody who might be using their Social Security number for credit as well. Place mail and sensitive mail in a lockbox and take it to the post office. And remember about medical identity theft. All your medical records in the U.S. will be in electronic form by 2015. And it's particularly dangerous if somebody is using your healthcare services. That means that their health information and yours have now been mixed together, and you may not receive the appropriate care when you need it. Use Wi-Fi carefully. Never share personal information on a public Wi-Fi. Make sure your computer is protected with antivirus software or anti-spy software. Put up as many firewalls as you can. And lastly, be careful about what you share on social media, and be careful about what your privacy settings are. We reveal a lot about ourselves on Instagram and Facebook. Your post and information can be taken by criminals and manipulated. And lastly, I want to thank you for your time this morning, and I hope you've enjoyed the 3D trip through the identity ecosystem and really come away feeling both curious as well as empowered a bit. Please visit our site at the Center for Identity for more resources and information that can help you better protect your information, or if you've had compromises, ways to better respond to those compromises. I hope I've left a few minutes for questions, but thank you again for coming to the session today.